Thank you, everybody. Thank you to the organizers. Thank you to Sissel. Thank you to Sebastian and all the tech team who's making us look so good up here. And thank you to Estrida for getting us started. So my talk today, Lessons from Birdsong. To introduce myself a little bit more, I'm Red River Metis from Winnipeg. The Metis are Indigenous people of the prairies in Canada, and this is me and my mom, who's Métis, and my dad, who's settler French. And up here you see the survey that the colonial powers came in and began to do to take the territory that my family lived on, and that when the surveyors arrived, it started a armed rebellion. And so our community is known for taking up arms, this is our logo, against colonial power, and dispersed the community. Yet my family lives on, if you see on this shot from Google Map, the orange slice is one of the places from the colonial survey, one of where the colonizer marked where my family lived, and the yellow square is where my aunt, my uncle, my mom, and my dad still live. And so now there's a whole city here. So that gives you a little sense of my starting place. And this is our Environmental Data Justice Lab. We're an Indigenous lab. That's a mix of scholars, academics, students, and community members. And we primarily work on an area called Chemical Valley in Ontario. Important thing maybe to know about our lab is that when we began working, we were trained by the organization Visualizing Palestine in how to do critical data analysis in relationship to colonialism, violence, and ongoing occupation. And so we are profoundly in solidarity with Palestine, and we continue as a lab right now to host a lot of events about Indigenous Palestinian solidarity in this moment. So Ontario Chemical Valley is where 40% of Canada's petrochemicals are refined. Here's, I hope, let's see if it's gonna work. Some video drone footage of Chemical Valley. There's something like 57 operating facilities along the St. Clair River, and the St. Clair River runs between Lake Huron and the Great Lakes down to Lake Erie. And it surrounds the community of Anishinaabe First Nation. Chemical Valley is about 150 years old. Oops. So, to get us started, I wanted to think with you about birdsong. So 150 years of petrochemical capitalism has produced a hell of a lot of pollution. Changes to birds, turtles, amphibians, waters, airs, humans, all of it. And so I've been really moved by the work of Sarah de Leon, who worked at the Cornell Ornithology Lab, who began to document that black-capped chickadees, and chickadees are a very, very common bird. I don't know if they're common here, but in North America, they're like one of the most common birds. And you see them in cities, you see them, they're very happy to kind of hang out with people. They'll come and, eat seeds out of your hands. Their songs change when they develop in the presence of, and in the case of this research, polychlorinated biphenyls. And not only biphenyls in general, but each different kind of biphenyl makes a different song change. So here's a little bit of the song of the black-capped chickadee, changed to be more variable when it develops in the presence of PCBs. And here is song sparrows also. Their songs are again more varied. Another bird that a lot of research has been done, a very common bird, is the European starling. And the European starling songs also are much more varied when those birds develop in relationship to persistent organic pollutants, particularly ones that are endocrine disrupting. The kind of interesting thing about these varied songs is that they make the birds more attractive to one another. So the more these songs are varied and complicated, the more they pique the desire of the other birds. And they actually end up having a lot more sex than the birds that don't develop in relationship to these chemicals. So I'll get more to why I feel like this is important. So our research is in Chemical Valley, where that star on the left is. Toronto is the star on the right. They're about 3.5 hours away. And this is in the Great Lakes region. And the Great Lakes region is Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee territory. And it's bound by this treaty that you see above. So when you think of a treaty, you might think of a piece of paper, with your terms and conditions, and then you sign it at the bottom like a contract. Well, this is what Indigenous treaty looks like on the Great Lakes. It's a wampum belt. The Dish with One Spoon Treaty is an ongoing treaty that anyone who lives in the Great Lakes is invited into. And it's an agreement to live peaceably on the same territory, where you are supposed to share in such a way that you never take more than you need, that you leave for others, both in who you are coexisting with, but others who are yet to come. And so we're very much guided by this work. The other thing about Chemical Valley is that it's right near this place, which is Crawford Lake. Crawford Lake is 2 hours away from Chemical Valley. Crawford Lake has been chosen as the golden spike, or the site to symbolize the Anthropocene. And it has been chosen because in taking geological cores from Crawford Lake, each year is marked with a different varv, it's called, a different stripe, and you can see the years. And you can show down to the year, where the arrival of, where the plutonium bomb went off, so that's an important marker. The arrival of a certain kind of fly ash that's related to the high temperature burning of fossil fuels. But what is exciting about this is that you can see around 1874, it shows the arrival of settler colonialism at Crawford Lake. So unlike any other core that was considered to symbolize the Anthropocene, this core, and why I really wanted it to win, was so happy it won, marks the arrival of colonialism. And in fact, the scientists can only sample the core under the permission and guidance of the Wendat people whose territory Crawford Lake is on. And so there's a kind of indigenous unseeding of the Anthropocene that Chemical Valley is a part of. Chemical Valley exists here, you can see between Lake Huron and Lake Erie. It was originally all Anishinaabe land. Today, it is, that Anishinaabe land has been divided into 3 different reserves. You can see Amsterdam First Nation there, and the many, many facilities. On the right of the river is Ontario, on the left is Michigan. The reason why it exists is because this is the area of one of the first commercial oil fields in the history of the world. Here, Pennsylvania, and there's another one in Russia in 1850, where commercial oil began to be taken out of the ground. And you can see, in 1850, just the land speculators just totally came in and began to make these very simple wells. There's thousands of uncapped wells. And then, this is what it looked like when it started in the 1850s, 1860s. It's just like oil going into the air. And in the archival work that we've done, You know, a lot of the commentators talk about there's much more oil that's put into the air, into the water, into what became called Black Creek than there was ever put into a barrel. And so out of this oil field came Chemical Valley. And in particular, we are obsessed with this place, which is the Imperial Oil Refinery, because it began in 1870. And it's still running. It is the oldest existing running refinery in the world. And you can kind of see it on this map. It was originally called the Dominion Refinery, that's in the far right. And in this map, which is from 1873, we can see that the refinery comes with the creation of now property lines, with the arrival of the mission, and the arrival of the railroad. So we see all these colonial infrastructures coming together to make what would become Chemical Valley. By 1897, this is what the refinery looks like. It's bought by Standard Oil. Who here can yell out, what did Standard Oil become?
Exxon and Chevron.
Exxon, yes. So, thank you. So another way of thinking about Chemical Valley that we try to impart is that Chemical Valley was made possible by settler colonialism. It was made possible by stealing the land. It was made possible by making reserves. It was made possible by stealing the children on reserves and putting them to residential school as part of indigenous genocide. It was made possible by making language illegal and ceremony illegal. It was made possible by what was then called the Pass Law, where you were not allowed to leave the reserve without permission of the Indian agent. And all that cleared the territory for the creation of this concentration of petrochemical capital. This is a painting by Kent Monkman about the clearing of the prairies. And so in this whole process, we can see so many kinds of data documents, right? Just the making of the property survey, just the drawing of the lines, the map making is a kind of settler colonial data making. And then out of the first kind of big refinery, Imperial Oil, we get this feedstock for the proliferation of, the styrofoam factory, the fertilizer factory, the plastic factory, and so on. And so there's hundreds, if not thousands, of pipelines in Chemical Valley. There's underwater caverns. Aamjiwnaang is surrounded above by the plumes, beneath by the caverns and the pipelines, to every side by the facilities. And this is a national project. It is on the $10 bill, or was on the $10 bill, and it's kind of part of Canada's commitment to extraction as the base of its economy, making a permission to pollute situation in Chemical Valley. So here is a flare that happened in 2017 in February. This is at the Imperial Oil Refinery. We can see it easily from the side of the river. Obviously, you can capture it on your cell phone, much like maybe you can use a cell phone to capture police violence. It's hard to capture emissions. They're often hard to see. They do them at night. This is what Imperial Oil said. Imperial Oil responded by saying, this was just a grass fire, all clear. No emissions were detected. There was no issues with air quality currently identified, and no injuries. This is absolutely typical of how information is provided in Chemical Valley. Other people who work in petrochemical corridors maybe see similar things. These events happen. These are just like some of the examples of other events happening just in the days around that flame. And you can see the quality of the information. High flare, unit upset. You don't hear anything more. So in our work, we have been working with community members and land defenders, generations of land defenders at Aamjiwnaang First Nation, to study settler colonial environmental violence. And this is a report we did. This is the cover of it by Mo Thunder. And there's a first generation of land defender, Ada Lockridge, who for 10 years took down each of these notifications by hand in calendars. Often the calendars were like the free calendars given by industry. And so painstakingly. And then after, Beezy and Vanessa Gray, who are lab members, and Beezy Gray began this in high school, on their computer, started writing down every notification. So we have 20 years of community-collected data of these notifications that are both something happened enough to make the companies say nothing's happening. That's basically kind of the level of the data. Of this kind of data, you can see like almost 80% has no named form in the notification. From this work, we've made with through a community process a map where people in the community can really get into the data and do their own analysis of it. But what I wanted to show you is who is the biggest notifiers. Shell, Imperial Oil, which you've already said is Exxon. Nova Chemicals, who I'll say the owner is in a moment. Suncor, Ineos Styrolutions, who I'll say who the owner is in a moment. The owners are Abu Dhabi and Saudi Aramco. So really we have 4 of 5 of the top 100 companies, 4 of the top 5 big oil companies surrounding Amsterdam, deciding the kind of information that they get. So we put this in the context of a long colonial process where more than human beings, skies and lands have been marked, named, and even datified by colonial institutions, shaping relationships with the environment with the aim to take control and possession over indigenous lands. In this way, we see this environmental data as full of colonial relations that cannot be plucked out of them. So what do? So in our research, we're trying to then figure out how can we do this another way? How can we start with indigenous values and do this another way? So we begin with this premise. The land behind the fence is still sacred. And this is another piece by Mo Thunder. Mo Thunder's from Amsterdam, a Two-Spirit artist. And we insist that the land, this under the refinery, even the metal that is made, that makes the refinery, is all earth being, that it's all sacred, and we too, who are damaged by it, remain sacred. We refuse to be understood as wasted or damaged. We've worked with community to reimagine what we would like pollution data to look like. And what I want to draw you to is this, starting with these kinds of Anishinaabe values. The voice of the land is in our language. Traditional and ceremony values are rooted in the land. The health of the land determines our responsibilities to future generations. We are here because of our ancestry. Honoring our ancestors means taking care of the land, past, present, and future, and living well with the land is a human right and responsibility. So you can hear the request and the need and the teaching that we always must start with the land. So in this work, we're really guided by violence on the land, violence of the body. This is a beautiful report that I hope everyone reads about Indigenous feminist land defense. And these artworks here are created by the Metis full spectrum doula, land defender, just full awesome person, Erin Consumo, who I adore, trying to get at a really different understanding of how violence on land and violence on body is co-produced. So in thinking this question together, we ask, what is chemical pollution when we start with indigenous knowledge? What is chemical pollution when we start with land-body understanding? What could be an Anishinaabe or Métis understanding of chemical pollution? So with that, we have to ask even, what is land? When you hear land, you might be thinking like earth, soil, mud, dirt, right? In Anishinaabe and Métis thinking, land is all our relations, right? Land is a shorthand for talking about all the non-human beings, the ancestors, and those yet to come, the airs, the waters. In talking about land, I find it helpful to turn to the work of Vanessa Watts, Anishinaabe Haudenosaunee scholar, who describes something called place thought. Place thought is the non-distinctive space where place and thought were never separated because they never could or can be separated. Place thought is based on the premise that land is alive and thinking, and that humans and non-humans derive agency through the extension of these thoughts. So land is alive and thinking. Our thoughts derive from the land. Our thinking derives from the land. We are manifestations of the land. So this is not just place-based thinking. This is place thought work. So to get you kind of deeper into understanding place thought, I find the paintings of Christy Belcourt, her drawings, really, really helpful. This is one that, if you look at anything around Standing Rock or any indigenous land defense, you're going to see this kind of water is life. But what I want to point out to you is the bird in the human, the water, the human in the water flowing through the woman into the sky, into the thunderbird, down again, that we become one another in non-Cartesian ways. We enable each other's livingness and reproduction in non-Cartesian ways. Reproduction does not go fish, 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 human, human, human. Reproduction goes land beings, land beings. Here's another example where we have to understand how we actually reproduce one another. And also, we don't even need people for this, right? There's manifestations of land and land being, and if land has thought and land has the law that we then follow. This is a piece called The Earth is My Government. Turtle Woman is making an offering of wampum to the plants of the animals. I showed you a wampum belt. This is that animals and plants also have political legal agreements with one another about how they relate. And so in these, the turtle makes the beaver, makes the fish, makes the water, makes the plant. These are agreements. So let's get back to the bird song, right? What do we think when we think about the bird being altered by the chemical, right? On the one hand, when I think about birds, I think about desire. First of all, I love watching birds. They're just magical. Whenever I'm talking to someone and a bird flies by, I'm completely distracted. Can't help myself. But also, birds make each other so beautiful, through their desire. They are so hot for one another. But also, they are so desirous of birds in a sunset. When you watch birds at sunset, it's incredible. They just are have such an aesthetic sensibility of joyful movement. If we think about starling murmuration, the ways they sense one another. So I think they have a lot to teach us about the actual extensiveness of our desirous becoming in our land-body relations. And when we think about the songbirds, we can think about that the exposures that make us are both external and internal. So PCBs, for example, or naphthalene, or all the stuff that's coming out of the stacks in Chemical Valley, are forms of external exposures. They're often endocrine participating, but we also have internal exposures. So when we're stressed, we have more cortisol. Light and dark changes our melatonin or thyroid. And then we might choose, particularly as humans, to put exposures on us. We might be interested in taking tea, or we might take birth control, or so on. So we have this whole array of external, internal exposures, a very few of which are consensual, most of which are non-consensual. So we are in general in a state of non-consensual endocrine participating with one another in ways internal and external that actually form our condition of being and becoming. I think of this as a kind of altered life. If it's a life, a kind of way of being life, where we're caught up in each other's killing and caught up in each other's living. Like we just can't get out of it. It's an idea of living in which life is already altered. We're all already altered by this stuff, but which we're still open to that alteration, internally and externally. So endocrine participating chemicals can also be sensitive to things, not just stress, but calm, by licking. So it's all this like wonderful work about like when one mouse licks another mouse and like changes their internal exposures. So when I think about this, I turn to Fanon. If I could reinvent my field of science and technology studies, Fanon would be a founding figure. And in Black Skin, Black Mass, he calls out to say, I should constantly remind myself that the real leap consists in introducing invention into existence. In the world in which I travel, I'm endlessly creating myself. And it is by going beyond the historical instrumental hypothesis that I will initiate my cycle of freedom. And this sense of a politics and ethics of becoming together, of invention into existence in our alter life is what I want to be thinking about or doing. So I've thought about this a lot in relationship to PCBs. PCBs are kind of derivative of coal tar, and they're used a lot in petrochemical refining and in electrical grids. So they're all over the Great Lakes. So if we think of PCBs in these kinds of ways I've gestured to, if we think about PCBs in relationship to place thought, pollution has all these extensive relations. Pollution is not a molecule out of nowhere. Pollution comes from earth beings where non-consensual and consensual things have happened, right? It comes in relationship to the agreement between the turtle and the kelp, right? It's in all these, we could say, legal orders and not just ecological orders. So in this way of thinking, chemical pollutants are not small. They are extensive. They are in infrastructure. They are in political, ethical orders, and they are constitutive of our kinships. So we're both, here, and we can draw on the work of Vanessa Agar-Jones, made kin, often disturbingly, by our exposure. So it's not just that us in this community who are exposed in our dispossession are kin, but we end up being kin with the very people who are doing the exposure to us, working or running the petrochemical factory, or the politicians who are giving permission to pollute, or and so on, as well as to all the animals. So this is the vision of chemical land-body relations. Let's just follow PCBs just for a little bit, because PCBs is what's linked to Birdsong change. PCBs were first manufactured in Anniston, Alabama. And here I point out the work of Ellen Spears in doing this history in her book, Baptized by PCBs. This factory was seen as a reconstruction project after slavery. Right, we're going to have like an industrial South in the United States. And who was the factory? Woo! Monsanto, gotta love it. Monsanto is the producer of all the PCBs in North America. So, and the PCBs are then products that are put in things like electrical transformers to keep them from catching fire. And there's many, many kinds of PCBs. They take many, many shapes. And then here, according to biomonitoring, we all got them in us. Pretty well every person alive has PCBs in us. And I think we've done biomonitoring on humans. We haven't done it in the same way on animals. But we are all alter life in relationship to PCBs as well as PBDs, flame retardants. And we know that these chemicals are participating, particularly because they're shaped very similarly as molecules between hormones. The PCBs started with Monsanto, but now they actually circulate primarily in atmospheric air dust circulations. So while at one point they were local source pollutants, now they circulate in this other way. So in the Great Lakes, we have point source pollutant, but we also have the bulk of the circulation comes from atmospheric circulation. So when we look at a map like this is the concentration of PCBs around the world as, taking as its measure beached microplastic or plastic resin pellets. Can we look at this as a map of birdsong? If we look at this map of PCBs in the Great Lakes, can we see this as a map of birdsong and also our own altered life? Here, when we look at PCBs in turtle eggs, we are also seeing a map of birdsong. Interestingly, one of the greatest concentrations of PCBs on the Great Lakes is in downtown Toronto. Why? Because of all the financial district that's there, and the headquarters, and a lot of electrical transformers. What is there in that concentration? It's the banking sector and the global mining sector. Toronto and Vancouver are the two biggest concentrations of mining headquarters around the world. These buildings, this is the TD Bank buildings, then also, in addition to holding PCBs, become swabs that stick out into that atmospheric flow, collect the PCBs on micro biofilms that are on the buildings, and then that wash down into the lake. So here we are back with birdsong. If we want to understand, I think, this change in birdsong, we have to be thinking, at least for me, this other way about land-body relations. It's not just that they are damaged. It's that we are caught up in each other's living and dying. And we are altering one another in each other's living and dying in ways that sometimes might make us more sexy and awesome, but also are killing us more softly and more intensely and unevenly distributed. So when we breathe in the PCB, when we're breathing in, we see the fish in the body, I think we can see the railroad. We can see the oil well, not just the fish and the water flowing through us. We see the pipeline moving through us. We see the hydro dam moving through us. We see finance capital. I've got a thing on for TD Bank. I always got to call them out. Please, someone ask me a question on TD Bank. And so, just to get to a kind of end here, what do we do with this? So going back again to the dish with one spoon, wampum treaty. This is a billboard done by the art collective Ogamamakana, which is Hayden King and Susan Blight, and two Anishinaabe folks who work at TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University. And this says in Anishinaabe Moen, if you want to learn something, first you must learn this. So if you want to learn something about how to begin taking on the responsibility of this altered life land-body relation, where does one start? In an anti-colonial politic of starting with Indigenous law, not the settler nation-state law that is the permission to pollute nation-state that built itself out of Indigenous elimination. So this is one place to start, to say there are other forms of ethics, laws, and political orders. The second place I think about is how to not I was going to say not be scared, but how to be more than pessimistic or more than scared or overflow fear and pessimism into the future of becoming something else. Becoming something else, yes, in this killing of one another, but yes, in our living through one another. This is another Métis artist, Elizabeth Lepense, who's a digital artist. This is one piece called Memories of the Future. And so in understanding reproduction is going from land to body back to land. Land is the past, right? It's where you start. Land makes body. But land is also the future. So I've had one experience of having an elder describe, like you look into the land for like the yet to come. Right. So this is also where the future, memory is where the future comes, where the past and the future are in the same spiral space. Here's another piece by Elizabeth Lepense of the people who sing for the water. Again, she also has lots of stuff about space canoes, which I love. But this sense of that we are becoming another people. And what is the kind of aesthetic, political, ethical practice to become another kind of being? And there's another version of this kind of becoming another future people. Here we're bringing the land and the language into that process. So I want to end on a poem that's not my own, but it's by Mahmoud Darwish, a Palestinian poet. So I've been reading a lot of Palestinian poets lately, maybe other people have too. And the birds are really important in Palestinian poetry and often symbolize like Palestinian people. And Darwish wrote many poems about birds. So here's one that I thought connected with what we're saying here today. Here the bird's journey ends, our journey, the journey of words. And after us, there will be a horizon for the new birds. We are the ones who forge the sky's copper, the sky that will carve roads. After us, and make amends with our names above the distant cloud slopes. Soon we will descend the widow's descent in the memory fields and raise our tent to the final winds. Blow for the poem to live and blow on the poem's road. After us, the plants will grow and grow over roads only we have walked and our obstinate steps inaugurated. And we will etch on the final rocks, long live life, and fall into ourselves. And after us, there'll be a horizon for the new birds. So I thought we might just listen to a blackcap chickadee again. And say merci, miigwech, and thank you.